Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Professor Oleander, and in the last video that I put up, I said that I was going to look at doing some of Hardee's tactics, and I went on the War of Rights forum and just to see if there was any interest in possibly making some videos on how to do maneuvers inside the game, and there was quite a few people that were interested in seeing it, so here we are. So today I'm just going to make a sort of a brief overview with some of the facing maneuvers, just to kind of get it going and seeing how the format's going to work, and just seeing how the reception is to it, because I may change this in the future. Um, I'll have some links in the description to a couple of different documents that you can use. One of them is a direct link to a scanned copy of Hardee's Infantry Tactics from sorry, I had a text message from work. Nothing important just yet. But what was I talking about? Oh yeah, there's a direct scan from Hardee's Infantry Tactics, which is the preferred manual used during the Civil War. There were several of them. You had everything from Casey's and Baxter's and Scott's and Gillham's, and I know I'm missing a couple of them in there somewhere. Gillham's is actually a fairly interesting one. It's based off of Revolutionary War drill, which was kind of taken from Baron von Steuben's managing of the Continental Army. Whenever I can't remember his official title, but he basically became the drill instructor for the Continental Army and sort of turned the tide for the war, really, because up until that point the Continental Army really had no organization. George Washington did what he could, but he couldn't train the men because he was in the army and whatnot. He just I don't want to say he didn't have the skill for it, but I don't know, he didn't have a very easy time of it. So the majority of units during the Civil War used Hardee's, which was created by a man named William J. Hardee. And William J. Hardee ended up turning to the South in 1861, I believe. He had written a drill manual in 1855, which was mainly geared around the 2-band musket. Or I'm sorry, that was the revised manual, which centered around a 3-band musket. And then he went back again in 1862 and made Hardee's Revised. Now, most units will use Hardee's Revised. There's a few other maneuvers in there. I can't remember what exactly there are, but there's a few differences, but most of them are the same. The predominant manual that was used during the war was Hardee's. You would see some Casey's mixed in there. You would see some Gillham's. The Virginia units in the early part of the war were known for using Gillham's. Matter of fact, I believe the 1st Virginia, when they marched into the Battle of Manassas, had Revolutionary War uniforms. Or they had uniforms that were made to look like Revolutionary War uniforms. I actually saw a reenactment unit from the 1st Virginia that looked really odd, out of place, when you compare it to the blue and the gray and everything else that you had seen. If you ever get a chance to go to a Manassas reenactment, go do it, because it's interesting to see the variety of uniforms, because a lot of units put a lot of thought into that. So now that I've gone off on a completely different tangent from what I started on, we were talking about Hardee's. The other link that I'm going to have is to a book called A Manual of Simplified Infantry Tactics for Reenactors, and this was posted by someone in the forum, and I'm extremely grateful to them for putting it up, because I had been looking for this for a while. It was printed in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 1985. I have it printed out now. It's 68 pages, and it has really good diagrams on how the movements are actually implemented. There's also some scaling in here for from the regulation size companies down to what you would typically see in the field with reenactors. Because you got to remember, Hardee's Tactics and all of the other drill manuals call for roughly 100 men size companies, and they call for 5 sergeants and 3 lieutenants and a captain, and at the regimental level they call for a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, a major, an ordnance sergeant, a quartermaster sergeant, surgeons, adjutants, all that. So this book, the Simplified Infantry Tactics, takes a combination of Hardee's and Casey's and combines them together, scales everything down so that that reenactors, and more importantly in the game of War of Rights, where you're not going to have necessarily 100-man companies, you can see the layout of how everything is supposed to be and be able to function without the 5 sergeants and the 10 or 12 corporals that you're supposed to have and the 3 lieutenants and all that. So with that being said, like I said, I will have those links in the description. They're good reads, especially the Simplified Infantry Tactics, because like I said, it has some stuff that's not necessarily put into publications like Hardee's. I think there's only one publication that actually goes over the formation of the company, and it's a militia manual from the 1830s, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, good reading. So, getting started into how to do the drill, let's go over who everybody is, starting from left to right. And yes, I'm using Source Filmmaker because it is much easier for me to use than a Flash animator, mainly because I can do this in the animator, move the camera to and fro so that way you can see how things are going. Now, as far as animating, I'm not, we're not going to worry about arms positions because that'll be covered with the game, because right now there's only shoulder arms and right shoulder shift. There's no support arms, there's no port arms, ground arms, arms at will, trail arms, reverse arms, all that mess. So the only weapons we're going to have are the swords, and I'm really not going to worry about them. They're just there for sorry, I had another text. They're just there to mark them. And the other thing, I've used different hats for the different individuals in the regiment. This is a kind of a carry-on from 1812 and the Napoleonic Wars. Different hats would signify different ranks or different units or different unit types. So this is sort of an identifier whenever you're looking at it from a bird's eye view, when we're over top of it. That way you can tell who each one of them is. Because if you ever go back and you look at the Napoleonic Wars in 1812, they'd have, these shakos like that, or they would have pom-poms, he's got a feather. They would have like a ball, or in the case of the old card, they'd have a bearskin hat. So, going from left to right, we've got the medic over here. He's going to be serving as our captain. Let me make sure I'm on the right scene over here so I can move the camera around. Oops, wrong button. I'm so disorganized. It's been a long week. Okay, now we can move the camera. So we got the medic over here who's going to be serving as our captain. Then we have our sniper who's going to be serving as all of our lieutenants, or the various lieutenants that we have. Beside him we have the demo man. This will be our first sergeant. Behind him, or beside him rather, we have the soldier who's going to be all of the other sergeants. So this will be the 2nd through the 5th sergeant. Beside him is our spy. He's going to be all of our corporals, and then the scout's going to be the privates. So these are the basic for a company formation. We're not going to get into regimental because honestly I don't think we're going to see anything regimental size in War of Rights. I could be wrong, but a regiment is 500 men, 300 to 500 men actually, and that's a lot of people. I would think that on a good day, if you could get 1,000 people on the War of Rights server at one time, you would basically have 2 regiments fighting at each other. Now, it would be cool, but I think the emphasis is going to be on companies based off of what we've seen in Warband Mountain Blade, and other games like this. I think Scourge of War as well. Which Scourge of War is a good game if you've never played it. It's a little expensive, but it's a good game. So let's move to the next one. This is what a company layout would look like. So you see the captain is out front. Let me get the camera so I can move. You see the captain out front here, and then you see the first sergeant is down here on the right, and you've got a second sergeant down here on the left, and then in the rear you have your third sergeant, and then you have the lieutenant, the first lieutenant actually, and then you have your fourth sergeant. Now we're not using a fifth sergeant because this is about half the size of a company, depending on which formation you're going with. Some would say that this is a standard size company, some would say that this is a little light. Usually companies were between 50 and 100 men. So this is about half of what a full-size company would be. You'd have an additional lieutenant and another sergeant. So just going over the roles, the captain is obviously the commander of the unit. He stands out front and center. He's roughly 6 paces, although that's a little short. I just put him there because just to give the position of where he would stand. The first sergeant is always over here on the right-hand side of the company. Now, one thing to note right now, anytime you say right or left, and this is important that you remember this, it's always based off of if you're standing in the ranks. So let's pretend we're in the ranks here. So the right of the company is going to be over here. The left of the company is going to be over here. The front of the company is going to be on this side. The rear of the company is going to be on this side. And the reason why I say this is important is because in Civil War drill and Napoleonic drill and all of the other drill that evolves from that, guides and knowing where your front are the most important things in maneuvering. Everything is based off of that. So if we go over here to the side, they're a little off, but for the most part, this is the line. If you've ever watched the movie The Patriot, you hear them saying, hold the line, hold the line. This is the line. This is called a company front or a battle line formation. Now you would have to imagine this is a company. In a battalion you would have 5 to 6 other companies stacked up. You know, this might be the center company, there might be a company over here, there might be a company over here, this could be the extreme left, this could be the extreme right. But the important thing is always maintaining this line. Now there's some drill maneuvers where you would actually change it. They're called changes of the front in the manuals. You would have change front forward, change front rearward, change it on the first company, change it on the last company, and so on and so forth. It gets very confusing, but as I've told, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I was the first sergeant with the company that I was with when I was reenacting. And as I told all the men in our ranks, I said, what the colonel says is immaterial. What you listen to is your company commander. So he's the one that's actually going to tell you what you have to do. And I'm just saying this just in the event that we do get up to battalion level drill. What the battalion commander says is immaterial to the ordinary man in the ranks. The captain has to pay attention to him. The private has to pay attention to the captain. So that's how it goes. The captain will parrot the command based off of what he has to do, because not all companies are going to do the same thing, depending on where they are. So, like I said, the first sergeant's on the right of the company's here, left of the company is on the other end. This is the front where the captain is, this is the rear where the lieutenant is. Now to form a company, I'm not going to go into detail on this for a couple of reasons. Excuse me. In the manuals that actually describe falling in, which there are very few that actually do, because falling in a company is such a mundane task that, you know, that you did it once, and unless you had high attrition in your company, you didn't have to do it again. For instance, because you would fall in by size, the tallest man would be on the right rear of the company. So this would be the tallest man in the company. The shortest man would be right here. And it would actually be this guy because the corporals get placed in later. So your shortest man would be on the left side. And the reason for that is when you're firing as a company, this guy has to be able to reach over the shoulder of the man in front of him. So he has to be able to look through that hole, and it wouldn't do if the guy in front of him was taller. So they would do what's called size march, and they would get in a single line, they would count off, and then they would do a right face, and then they would move the guys up, and then they would front, and then they would do another right, they would count off again, and they would be in their formation. You'd be like this. Which, speaking of that, I should mention why some of these guys are blue and some of these guys are red. In a company formation, let's say you've got the company formed here, and basically in War of Rights, I mean, unless you really were a stickler to say, okay, we want to do it by the book, where you would say, in one rank, by height, form company. And then you would count off, and each man would go 1, 2. So, for instance, everybody but the first sergeant, because the first sergeant's technically not in line at this point. This guy would go 1, this guy would go 2, this one would be 1, this one would be 2, 1, 2, and so on down the line until you get all the way to the end. When they right face, the 2s would step up to the right, they would step up here behind this, or beside this guy, and it would go all the way down the line, and then you would front them, which is to put them back in this position. And then you would do right dress, which everybody closes up, and then you would count off again. So you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I know it sounds confusing, but once you see it in action, it will actually make sense, because we'll do the facings, and we'll leave it at that one for this one, because I don't want to overwhelm everybody. Just make sure I got my stuff for you. Okay, so as I said, these guys are different colors. The red guys are the 1s, or the odd numbers. The blue guys are the 2s, or the even numbers, and that'll make sense here in just a minute. So let's cut this company in half and use something that's a little bit more manageable and something that's a little more likely to happen in War of Rights. Oops. There we go. So this is what I would project would be about the biggest company that we would see in the game. This is, I believe, 20 men. 20, 21, 22 men, somewhere around in there. So we've scaled back from 4 sergeants down to 2 sergeants. You have a first and a second, then you've got a captain, and you've got a lieutenant. The lieutenant is sort of optional at this point. Lieutenants mainly serve as platoon break. So if we were to break, let me go back here for just a second. If we were to break this company into, let me do this so I can move about freely. So looking at this right here, this would be like a squad. This would be another squad. And then you have, in terms of modern military, you would have squad leader, assistant squad leader. Squad leader, assistant squad leader. And then you would have a sergeant who, once this breaks into platoons, which the platoon break is right here in the middle of the company, this would be first platoon, this would be second platoon. So you would have a platoon commander, which would be your lieutenant. Then you would have a platoon sergeant, who at this point would end up being your third sergeant. This guy would be taking the place of the first sergeant. He becomes the right guide of the platoon. And then the captain, if you don't have another lieutenant, would take the place of the first platoon commander. This would become the platoon sergeant. The first sergeant would be the guide. And then, and then this corporal would be the second sergeant. And I should say this too, the second sergeant would actually come over here. He would take a position as he would act like a first sergeant. Now, while I'm on the subject of that, I mentioned guides. Let me get my camera back up here. I mentioned guides. So this is the right guide of the company. That is the first sergeant's primary function whenever the company is maneuvering. This is the left guide of the company. Now the second sergeant is sort of... he doesn't have a defined... Well, he does have a defined job. He actually has to do the most moving of all the sergeants. So when the company's left flank is exposed, the second sergeant is on line. If there were a company right here beside them, like imagine that there's another company right here, their first sergeant would actually be up against the shoulder of this corporal. The second sergeant would be back here behind this file, the second file from the left, serving as a file closer. Anytime that the left flank of the company is exposed, the second sergeant comes out to become the guide. And like I said, the reason why is that there is a notion to preserve this line. And that is the job of the sergeants. They are here to keep this line straight, or as straight as humanly possible. They are the guides for the men. And you'll see that whenever we go into facing maneuvers here in just a second. So everything is based off of the front. Like I said, this line right here is your company front, and you always need to remember which way your front is, because the command to get out of a right face or a left face is the front. So let me make sure I'm on the right one. I'm not. Let's go to that one. So let's see what a right face looks like. So the command would be company, assuming that everybody's counted off, it would be company right face. And this, you go from a line of battle into what a lot of people have called a column of fours. It's basically just a column formation or to march by the flank. So you see what's happened is all of the number 2 men have stepped up in between the number 1 men. Let me scale it back just a bit here. You notice how the rear rank number 1, in the manual it doesn't say this, but I always argued that it was assumed that it would happen, because you've got a man that has to go up in here and fill this hole, so he would have to give way in order for him to fit. And this guy's not quite in line, but I don't know how he got pushed to the floor, but this is how they would do it. Everybody would face to the right, and the 2s would step up in between the 1s. And then the 1s on the rear rank would sort of give a little bit to the right to accommodate them. You notice that the corporals are subject to the same rule. Now the second sergeant doesn't move. The second sergeant always stays on this line. And again, that has to do with whether or not the company's flank is exposed. The first sergeant also doesn't move. The first sergeant doesn't count at all. He's his own entity. Now you notice that the captain went from the middle of the regiment here. He moved over here to the left of the first sergeant. That's because at this point, technically, the captain becomes the guide for the line. The captain is telling the line where he needs it to go. The first sergeant is the guide for all of these guys, and then the captain is guiding the first sergeant. So say the road sweeps around, say there's a road here and it kind of curves around to the left. The captain, well, let's say it swerves around to the left and there's a gate right here that goes out into a field. The captain may want to keep going through that field, so he would just keep on marching straight, and as long as the first sergeant is on his shoulder, everybody else will just follow him, which is why the importance of shoulder-to-shoulder contact is there in this type of drill, is so that everybody you have a physical reference or a tangible reference to where your place in line is. As long as you can feel the person next to you, you know the theory is that everybody is straight, or everybody's doing the same thing. So this is a right face, and like I said, we'll go through it again. This is a company front, and then you would do right face, Whoops, went too far. There we go. So yeah, it's a very simple maneuver. It takes a little bit to get used to. This is one of the hardest things to do in this drill, is getting the concept of which number are you, which way do you have to row. And it says in the manual that on a right face, the even number men step up to the right. So there you see, they all step up to the right, and then the captain takes his position. And then on a front, it's just the opposite. Everybody just goes right back to where they were, and then you go back to your company front. Okay, so the next maneuver is the one that blows everybody's mind, because reenacting units love to do stuff by the right because it's just so easy. The problem is, oh, I should say one more thing. When we're going by the right here, I mentioned guides. So you'll see, at least in reenacting, you'll hear forward march, guide left. That means that the important point of contact is to the left. So these guys here have to keep this line, because all of these guys over here are addressing to them. So when they say guide left, that means that wherever the left of the company goes is where everybody else has got to follow. Now, one thing I want you to notice is what's over here on the left. This is the theoretical company front. And that's why it is so important to know where your front is, because the front becomes the guide. And it's especially important whenever you're moving by battalion. Now, they may change it, and they might say when you're in a battalion front, they might say guide on the center, which would be guide to the colors, because the colors are a good reference. But they could also say, they could say guide right, they could say guide left, they could say guide center. When you're on column like this, it's always going to be to the position of the front. So when you face to the right, the guide will be to the left. When we face to the left, which we'll go ahead and do that now, we'll get back into a company formation here. Get my camera. So when we do a left face, and yes, I know that the medic is hovering over the ground. Let me fix that right now. There we go. I'm a stickler for that kind of thing. I didn't see it because I was doing it from above. But on a left face, you see that the ones have stayed in place, or I'm sorry, the twos have stayed in place, and the ones have stepped up to the left. So just kind of going back through it. It's the same thing as a right face, just in reverse. So you see that the number one mans take a step back, and then they take a step forward, and the rear rank gives a little bit of space so that they can fit in there. And you notice that the sergeants have not changed. Now I have to go back and double check this, because I can't remember if the first and the second sergeant have to change. And I really should have read a little bit deeper, because I think there was a blurb in here that says that the guides would have to post, so these guys would have to swap. I know that's true in a counter column, but for right now, let's just say the second sergeant would stay here, and then the first sergeant would stay here. So on a left face, if we look at it from this way, your company front is still over here, so the guide has changed. Now it's guide right. So on a left face, you guide right. On a right face, you guide left. It's always the opposite, and it's always whatever way your company front is. And to front, it's the exact opposite. The twos will turn in place back to the original company front, and then the ones will step back up. And that is about all that I want to go through in this one. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we need to cover. Like I said, knowing where your company front is important, because that is going to serve as the basis for when you when you have to front, and that also serves as the basis of your guide. Now, eventually, I probably will do some quote-unquote battalion drill with 2 companies, just so you can see it. I won't get too heavily involved in that because, like I said, that's going to be one of the things that you're probably not going to see a whole lot of. So, I will take any criticisms of this that you have, any comments that you have on it, any questions. I'm going to try and sit down and make some more of these in the future as I have time. It's been a very busy week. Summer is usually busiest for us. So with that being said, I'm going to leave it at that. And again, any questions, comments, please let me know if you have any concerns or anything that you might be able to add to it. And with that, I will say thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.